Hello everyone, BadServo here. Just wanted to give a quick review for a video game I just completed for the Playstation 3, which is Heavy Rain. Heavy Rain is a Playstation 3 exclusive title. It's unavailable for other platforms, and actually is one of the driving factors in my recent purchase of a PlayStation 3. This is a game I really wanted to check out. Heavy Rain is a production of developer Quantic Dreams. If that name sounds familiar, you may have played their previous work, Indigo Prophecy, also known in some regions as Fahrenheit. If you've played that game, you're going to find a lot of parallels between the two, but Heavy Rain is definitely, I would say, an evolutionary step in the kind of game experience that we were exposed to in Indigo Prophecy. Now, right up front, before I get into the meat of the review, I want to issue a couple of warnings. Warning one is that to discuss certain aspects of the game that I want to for a well-informed review, there will be some light spoilers. Nothing heavy. I'm not going to tell you who is the killer and did the butler do it, but just minor spoilers about the nature of the game, little peeks behind the curtain. So if you want to reign completely unspoiled, you may not want to watch this review, but I don't think I'm going to say anything that's going to ruin anyone's experience. Secondly, just a note about the nature of the game itself. Now, Heavy Rain, to say that Heavy Rain is not a cheery title would be the understatement of the decade. The game is dark. It is downright soul-sucking depressing most of the time. It is definitely an adult game. I mean, you can't get much more mature than the content of this game. Specifically, though, this game appears to have been engineered from the ground up to specifically fuck with the psychology of parents. Like, if you're a parent, like, this game is gonna get to you a little bit. Now, that's not a hit against the game. If you're an adult looking for adult stories about real-world situations, you know, I think you kind of have to expect this kind of material. But that's just a warning out there. If you know, you're prone to depression or you have a real problem with violence, especially violence involving children, this may not be the game for you. So bear that in mind. Okay, so moving into the review. Heavy Rain has come under a lot of fire from hardcore gamers for not really being a game per se. The contention most people have is with the play mechanic. Now, Heavy Rain utilizes an unusual play mechanic in that with the controller, you can maneuver your character around whatever setting you're in, and the actions are performed by a series of button presses, which changes depending on the difficulty you select at the onset, and a set of analog stick movements. For instance, if you want to open the door, and it has a handle, you know, that tilts like this, you would probably press down on the analog stick to open the door. If you have to pick up an especially heavy object, it may ask you to repeatedly hammer on the X button in order to do it. As I say, these combinations get tricky. That's one side of the gameplay. The other side of the gameplay, and this is when things tend to get really frantic, when parts in the story that I would call action set pieces basically become glorified QuickTime events, in which you have to rapidly hit a series of the right buttons in the right order at just the right time to clear or affect a course of action in the game. I know a lot of gamers hate QuickTime events, and I agree that in a lot of games they're out of place, but in this one it's such a core part of the mechanic, and I think the frantic nature of QuickTime events lends itself extremely well to the high-pressure situations that they're used in this game. This is a game where I think QuickTime events help immensely. I have no fault with the gameplay mechanics. So if you're a person that hates QuickTime events, or you know, only like first-person shooters, you want a run and gun, you want a platformer, this is not the game for you. It is a game in that you affect the course of action with a controller. But if I had to pick a genre for this, this would be interactive fiction. This is more like a CGI choose-your-own-adventure novel than anything. And that's not bad. I'm not a gamer that is in it for the score or the trophy or the achievements or any of that shit. I love a story. And Heavy Rain presents an extremely compelling narrative. You really, really do want to keep playing to see what happens, to solve the mystery, to get information on the characters that are presented to you in the game. So the gameplay, you know, it can be frustrating. There are times you'll find you probably are going to have to do things over to affect a course of action that you may not have been skillful enough to pull off the first time. But I don't think that's really a problem, because if you really care about the story, Heavy Rain is a game you're probably going to have multiple playthroughs through. So moving forward, again talking about the control scheme, one complaint that I have about the game is the walking mechanic. The walking mechanic is extremely spotty. The game does not give you free camera control. The camera is automatic. You can change the angle of the camera with a press, but it is still completely computer controlled. You can't choose what angle you're viewing directly with an analog stick. Which is fine, but as you're moving through an area, if the camera changes, sometimes the walking controls get reversed. Sometimes it's extremely difficult to get a character to move in the direction you intend, say to go around a table or to approach a specific object. But that's, I mean, as far as the gameplay mechanic, that's the only thing I can nitpick, and after a time you do get used to it. I don't think it's a deal breaker. But if that kind of stuff really frustrates you, then yeah, that's something to be aware of. The walking controls could definitely be improved. Everything else I'd say works pretty well in that regard. Now, up to now, it probably seems like I'm hitting you with an overwhelming amount of negatives about the game. So let me take this opportunity to say that I am a huge fan of this game. I would easily give it 4 out of 5 stars, and hands down it would be in the top 5 best games that I've played in 2010 and so far in 2011. But yeah, I do want to inform you about issues that the game has. Another of which is technical glitches. Now, I've played through the game a couple of times now, and one thing you'll notice, especially if you play it on you know, like an HD monitor where you're kind of a little closer on it as opposed to a flat screen TV that you might be further away from, there is a ridiculous amount of screen tearing in this game, both in cutscenes and during the actual gameplay. The screen tearing is not so bad that the game's unplayable, and it doesn't happen constantly. But the problem with the screen tearing is that this game is so visually striking. I mean, just due to the atmosphere of the game, it's a very dark, noir-type setting, but the graphics themselves are fantastic. The character models are very good. The voice acting is very good for the most part. It's a very compelling game. It's a very visually compelling game. And it really draws you into the drama. So that's why when you are really drawn into this world and everything is so visually stimulating, when you see the screen tearing, even though it's not a huge deal visually, it just pulls you out. It pulls you out of the game enough that it gets very frustrating. Also, occasionally I found that during a cutscene or a pivotal moment, vocals would cut out. I experienced this maybe 4 times in, I'd say probably a 20+ hour total playing time, where a character would be talking and then all of a sudden, just like that, you don't know what the hell they're saying. never lasts very long, but it was annoying when it occurred. The game did crash on me once, in which, in the middle of a cutscene, screen froze. You could still hear audio as if the game were still doing something, but the visuals didn't change, and the controller was unresponsive. So that was a little annoying, but the game is constantly auto-saving. You're never far away from where you were if you have to quit or if there's a crash or anything like that. So yeah, I would say that probably covers most of the technical glitches and gameplay things you should be aware of. Now, as far as the game itself, the game is quite good. If you're in it for the story, if you like a whodunit, crime drama, something with a little more grit and realism than your first-party Nintendo title, I think you do well to play this game. Even if you're not really a gamer, I think it's a story that can hook you in enough to go through the button-pressing movements. The concept of the game is thus. It is essentially the present day. You are presented with 4 characters. Over the course of the gameplay, which is broken up into various chapters, you switch to controlling these different characters. Each one has a role to play in the story. First off, you have Ethan Mars, who is a distraught father who had his child die some time ago. He's sort of estranged from his wife, and he's kind of trying to pull his life back together. You have a private investigator, which is Scott Shelby. He is investigating a series of murders that are taking place in the game by a killer known as the Origami Killer. You also play FBI agent Norman Jaden, who's also been sent to the city to investigate the killings. And lastly, journalist Madison Page, who gets embroiled in the affairs, also in her investigation of the Origami Killer. So that sounds unusual. Again, it's much like in Indigo Prophecy, where you switched perspectives between the 2 lead characters. It's very interesting because it allows you to see sort of different perspectives on the same thing. It also gives the game a clever way of allowing you to have more options than you might otherwise with a single protagonist. One of the spoilery bits I would mention is that this game has not only multiple endings, but multiple ways that a number of things can happen. Especially towards the later chapters, the choices that you make can pretty heavily affect the outcomes later on in the game. The closest analog I could make would be Mass Effect 1 or 2, where changes that you make or decisions that you make affect the course of events in not only it but future games. This one's pretty crazy. I mean, if 2 people played this with no prior information, you could walk away with 2 pretty damn different stories, especially towards the end. So I like that, and it does give the game a degree of replayability that a lot of story-heavy games that are more linear would not have. Now that said, the game is fairly linear. You're going to be this character, and you're going to be in this location, and then it's just what you do affects the chapters and locations that occur beyond that point. So yeah, I mean, you could really sink a lot of time into this game, trying to get all the tiny little details and trying different things and seeing how they work and seeing the different endings. Yeah, I mean, it's a very impressive game. I guess that's really all I can say about it. I would strongly recommend fans of interactive fiction to check this out. Like I say, detective noir style stuff. Get in there. It's really quite good. As I said, aside from a handful of technical glitches that you may or may not encounter on my first playthrough, I didn't see a lot of that. It's fairly impressive. You may notice, though, one negative of the sort of multi-branching paths that the story can take is that occasionally there'll be a minor continuity glitch that you're not quite clear on. For instance, one of the characters you control may have knowledge of another character that they have not actually met in the course of the game. Now, sometimes that can be fixed on another playthrough where they do encounter each other and it makes sense that they've met, but if you do things just right, it can lead to some oddities. Also, the way that they introduced the killer in the end was a little unsatisfying for me, because it didn't explain a handful of questions that were left in the end. I do plan to go online and do some digging to see if I can find some developer comments that might clarify some of this stuff. But yeah, if you have a PlayStation 3, you're doing yourself a damn disservice not to at least rent it and try it out, and stick with it through the first several chapters, because the game does start slow, partly to get you acclimated to the control scheme, and partly just because, you know, it makes the balance of the game have a little more kick. So that's it. Heavy Rain. It was BadServo. Go get it, and good gaming.